Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Jacqueline Barber, and I'm the Director of Research at the FXB Center and one of the co-organizers of this conference. This is our third and final day of what's been a fascinating and I think very productive set of meetings and discussions about national and actually sub-national identification systems. We've covered a lot of ground. And today, for our final half day of the conference, we're starting off with someone who really needs no introduction, but who I nevertheless am going to briefly introduce, who will speak to us and then engage with us for the first hour of our meeting. And then we will have our final panel discussion, and then we'll have a round table, which we're envisaging as a collective discussion rather than a round table of a few experts. We hope to pool all the good ideas in the room and invite everybody to think together about next steps, what we've learnt from the time we've spent together, both in terms of our own disciplines, but also from others who've spoken and participated. So that's how we're going to manage the day. But it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Nandan Nilekani. We're very sad you're not with us, Nandan, but we're very grateful to have you virtually with us. As I said, Mr. Nilekani doesn't really need any introduction, but just a few key lights from his extraordinary career. As many of you know, he co-founded Infosys, which is one of the largest IT companies in the world, valued at $42.15 billion earlier this year. He worked at Infosys until 2009, when he co-founded the Unique Identification Authority of India, which, as I think everybody in the room knows, is the body responsible for the Aadhaar program. He was appointed to this position of chair of Universal, whatever it is, the acronym's escaping me, UIDAI, by the then Prime Minister of India, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. So he reported directly to the Prime Minister, very unusual arrangement, but one I think that highlighted the enormous esteem in which he was held following publication of his book, Imagining India, and also the work he'd done at Infosys. So he has since stepped down from that chairmanship, but is obviously still very closely involved with this field. And I think many of us owe our kind of induction to thinking about national identification and its potential to Nandan's vision. His work and his brilliance has been multiply rewarded. He received a Padma Bhushan from the government of India, one of its absolutely highest honors. He was named twice by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world, and also named by Forbes as Businessman of the Year in 2006. So, and I'm sure many, many other accolades. So, Nandan, thank you so much for joining us, and we very much look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and I'm really sorry I couldn't be there with you personally, physically in your presence because of some personal challenges. But nevertheless, I'm here to speak to you and talk about the topic of unique ID, Aadhaar, and the experiences that we had. Incidentally, Dr. Ajay Bhushan Pandey, who is the current head of the Aadhaar program, is there with you. So you can always ask him more questions after my talk. The Aadhaar program, or the UIDAI, was conceived by the Indian government in 2006, and finally a decision was taken in 2009, early 2009, to start this program. And I was invited by the Prime Minister to join the government to head this project in July of 2009, and I joined in August of 2009. Now, the purpose of this was to give a unique ID to every resident of India, which meant more than 1 billion people would have to have a unique single number which could be associated with them. And the purpose of this was really twofold. The first was, it was a project of inclusion, because of the fact that the birth registration system in in India is not really at 100%. In fact, in many uh, states, it's as low as 50% of the births only are registered. It meant that there were a lot of Indian residents who didn't really have any form of ID. And historically, this was not a problem if you lived and spent your entire life in one village. But with increasing mobility and migration, not having an ID which was valid across the country was becoming an increasingly big problem when people wanted to travel, get a job, or get education or whatever. So one reason for the ID program was inclusion. The second reason was that in the last 15 years, India has built a welfare state with a lot of direct benefits that go directly to people, employment, health, education, and so on. And it was very important that the delivery of that reached the right people, and there needed to be efficiency because the estimate was because of lack of a good ID of the underlying beneficiary, there was anywhere from 10 to 30, 40% leakages happening in government programs. And when the government was totally spending around $60 billion, that kind of leakage was very not good because that money could have been better spent in giving it to the people who deserved it. So both these reasons led to the project. Now, one thing I want to make clear at this point is that we should distinguish a legal ID from a unique ID. A legal ID or a national ID or a citizenship registration is something that you do at birth, and you get a birth certificate, and along with that, it becomes the basis for your citizenship. And that has been done at birth. A unique ID is just a number that says you are who you claim to be, and in subsequent transactions with the system, you can use a unique ID to verify that you're the same person you claim to be when you first registered into the system. This is important because in many of the countries where birth certificates and birth registration is not very robust, you need to start with a unique ID and get everybody to have a single ID. And then subsequently, you can have another process by which you ascertain who is a citizen or who is not. And also, you can then make sure that all prospective births from that day onwards have the unique ID so that ultimately you can link it to birth. But initially, when you have already a large population of undocumented residents, it's very important that we start by giving a unique ID first. Now, a few things that we thought about in 2009 was we were developing a system in the 21st century, and we said it's important that there should be an online ID because as more and more services were going online, it was very important that we actually have a way to authenticate somebody online. So the online was very important. The other challenge we had was how do we make sure that a person is unique? Because if there are millions of people and they don't have any documents which are robust, then even a few people, if they game the system by applying many, many times, the whole integrity of the system would be suspect. And therefore, we had to have a foolproof way of ensuring that people were unique. And for that, we chose to use the biometrics of the person. And we said that if it's going to be 1 billion plus people, we need to have a way of uniquely identifying 1 billion people with biometrics. And we came to the conclusion after a little bit of research that if we have all the 10 fingerprints and the iris of both the eyes, there was sufficient digital diversity there to establish uniqueness. So this is called as multimodal biometrics because it uses both the fingerprints and the iris. So one of the major goals of using biometrics was to ensure uniqueness, and that was done by a process of biometric deduplication, which meant that you had a list of all the people in your database, and if a new person enrolled into your system, you checked his or her biometrics against the database that you had to make sure it was not a duplicate. So this is called as biometric deduplication. And what has been built in India is the world's largest biometric deduplication capability by putting together multiple engines of deduplication so that we got choice and we got efficiency and so on. We also had to build a system which was very fast because we wanted to make sure that this project got over in a few years. So the system was designed for very high volume, and it's designed to do as much as 1.5 million Aadhaar issuances per day or 1.5 million enrollments per day. and it has reached more than 1 million on many days. So this system was, we designed the system starting July, August 2009. It was rolled out in September 2010, so it was rolled out after 14 months. And as of this moment, about 935 million people have an Aadhaar issued in India. That means 935 million residents have an Aadhaar issued, and this should reach 1 billion people in the next few months. So that makes it really the world's largest ID program of this type done by a government. Now, one important role, therefore, of the biometrics was to ensure uniqueness. The second important role of biometrics was as a way of authenticating. In other words, if somebody went somewhere and wanted to claim a particular service and they said, I'm XYZ, and if the system said, how do I know you're XYZ, then you could give a biometric like a fingerprint or the iris, and it would check online against your name and your database to see whether you're indeed the same person who enrolled under that name with that biometric. So this is a way of authenticating you. Now, when we designed this in 2009, biometrics was not well known in the consumer space. But today, as you know, almost every smartphone now will have some kind of a biometric or the other. In the case of the iPhone, you have the Touch ID, which is a fingerprint biometric. The latest Marshmallow operating system from Google has a fingerprint authentication capability. And the latest Microsoft Lumia also has an iris scanner. So fundamentally, now these technologies of biometric capability are now becoming a standard in cell phones or smartphones, which will really make them essentially consumer service kind of devices. But when we designed it, it was not there, but we had sort of planned or anticipated that this would become more and more ubiquitous. So this system was designed for rapid enrollment because we had to get to, I had made a commitment in the first meeting of the Prime Minister that before we step down in 5 years, we would cross 600 million. So we did that in 4.5 years, after which I stepped down from the government. And since then, the new government, which came into power in May 2014, has accelerated the Aadhaar program, and that's why it's reached 935 million people as of date. But to make this work, to make this enrollment happen, we had to build a system that allowed you to onboard more than 1 million people a day. So a lot of thought went into the architecture of enrollment, the simplicity, the use of enrolling agencies, making sure that people could enroll anytime, anywhere, so that it was very convenient for them. When they had some time, they could go and enroll. Working through multiple partners. At peak, the Aadhaar system had something like 25 to 30,000 enrollment points across the country. It was designed for convenience, speed, ease of use, and choice for the resident. And that was the reason for its success in reaching such a large scale in such a short period of time. So the big two capabilities that the Aadhaar system gives, one is of course authentication, and you can authenticate a person online in real time using either the fingerprint or the iris. And the second capability we built later was called electronic KYC. Now KYC is know your customer, and today whether you want to get a SIM card phone or whether you want to get a bank account, you need to be able to give your name and address details. So we provide that name and address details now electronically, so I can go somewhere, give my Aadhaar number, give my consent, and then give my KYC details to the bank or to the mobile company and get an instant bank account or an instant SIM card. So the authentication and KYC were two fundamental features that we provided as part of this system. It's also very important that we thought of this as first as a unique ID and not necessarily a legal citizenship ID, and second as a number and not a card. It was very important that we thought of it as a number. The number could go into a cell phone, the number could go into a passport, the number could go into a driving license. So being a number, it became, virtually, it could be embedded in any particular product. So that was very important in the design. The other important thing was that we said, while the ID will have lots and lots of applications, we must provide it in a layered manner. So the ID became one layer, the KYC became another layer, and so on. And this layering is very important, because if you try to do a project in government where you try to achieve too many objectives, then the project becomes very big and then it sort of sinks under its own weight. So having a very light, simple design that could be scaled up rapidly with the ability to layer on more and more things above it was a very important criteria in the design of this. The other important thing we did was we looked at what is the application of the ID, which could really make it fly. And we said the best use of the ID is for direct benefit transfer into people's bank accounts or into the food account of the various benefits. So we worked very closely with a body called the NPCI, the National Payment Corporation of India, which is a Indian domestic retail payment company, something like how Visa and MasterCard used to be here in the US. And this organization, NPCI, worked very closely with the Aadhaar system and designed a complete payment infrastructure using Aadhaar. So first, we worked with them and we designed the system where using the eKYC, I could open a bank account. Second, we designed something called the Aadhaar payment bridge, where the ID was linked to the bank. And so when the government had to make a payment like a pension or a scholarship, it just had to send money to the number and the number would map to the appropriate bank. So this is called as the Aadhaar payment bridge. And today about 220 million people have bank accounts linked to their Aadhaar numbers. And then we developed a technology called the micro ATM, which allows a grocery store in a village to authenticate themselves using Aadhaar and get money from their bank account. So this makes it easy for people to get access to their digital money without a huge investment in branches or in ATMs. So working with the NPCI, who parallelly built the complete infrastructure for cash transfers, we have built what is now believed is to be the world's largest cash transfer system. And one of its most successful usages has been in subsidy reform, because subsidy earlier was embedded by reducing the price of the product. Now subsidy reform is making sure the product is still sold at market price and the subsidy is given as a cash transfer. And this has been successfully implemented by the government. It began with the previous government and taken to closure by this government in the LPG or liquid petroleum gas system, where more than 120 million people are buying cylinders or gas cylinders, energy cylinders, and getting cash into the bank account. This system is currently doing about 3 million transactions a day, which is approximately about close to 1 billion retail payments a year, making it the world's largest cash transfer. And each of these payments would be something like $10 or something. So it's really a very high volume, low cost, low transaction value system. And that system, if it is applied to other subsidies in India, like fertilizer or food or kerosene or many electricity, water, has the potential to go up to $60 billion of subsidies being converted into cash transfers and about 4 billion transactions a year. So this cash transfer system linked to the ID was a very important and very profound application. And we believe that this has played a big role in the success of the project. But otherwise, we basically designed the ID as a layered system. So the ID can be used to do a proof of ID and KYC in a passport, in a driver's license. The government today has a biometric attendance system where more than 300,000 government employees use Aadhaar to authenticate themselves when they go to work. So there are lots and lots of applications that are possible. Excuse me. That are possible using the ID. And therefore this layering, where the ID only did the proof of identity and the proof of address, and everything else was on top of it, is a very important minimalistic layered design. And this is what is called in the internet world as an hourglass architecture, where the stem of the hourglass is where you have the APIs, and above and below the hourglass you have innovation happening. In the case of Aadhaar, the innovation above the stem is like the authentication and KYC protocols. Above the hourglass, the stem, the applications are micro ATMs or attendance systems or KYC. And below the stem, you have continuous improvements in the biometrics and other technologies. And the latest manifestation of that is the smartphone with the embedded biometrics. So this system was designed for scale. It was scaling at a daily rate of 1.5 million per day, and it has the potential to scale up to a billion plus people. The number itself is a 12-digit random number, with one digit being a checksum, which means that you have 100 billion combinations. And we don't use numbers starting with 0 or 1, which means we have 80 billion numbers to choose from. So anybody who applies gets one of those 80 billion numbers randomly. And because it's only a billion people out of 80 billion numbers, it's sparsely distributed, which makes it more difficult to crack. And also, a number that is once assigned to a person is not reused. So if somebody dies, the number is not reused. So everybody gets a new number, which ensures that the uniqueness is established. The speed was important because our goal was to reach 600 million in 5 years and make sure that it is so ubiquitous and so universal that it is continued even though there may be a change in government. And that has happened, and the new government, as I mentioned, under Prime Minister Modi, has fully supported Aadhaar, and they took it from 600 million to 935 million, and it's part of their monthly review process. And they also took the LPG, which was about 30 million people were getting cash transfer. They took the thing to the complete 130 million people who had to be given. So that was done. The system is designed to be highly secure. It's not an online system in the sense that there's online authentication, but that is done through 2 perimeters of security and so on, so that it's not like you can access this data from the internet or something. Similarly, when enrollment happens, though enrollment happens with private enrolling agencies, the data is encrypted at the point of source, at the point of collection. So nobody can intercept the data or crack it. It's using the very high level of 2048-bit encryption, which means nobody can even decrypt it in thousands of years. So it's very, very high level of encryption right from the point of data collection all the way back to the database. So it's all highly secure, a lot of emphasis on security. The biometric deduplication is anonymized so that the biometric engine doesn't know whose data is being deduplicated and so on. So a lot of design principles to make it very secure. The system is also designed for privacy because it's only an ID system and does not capture the actual transactions. So for example, if the ID system is used in the banking system, then the banking system has the data about financial transactions, not the ID system. Similarly, if the healthcare record system uses the database, then the healthcare record is in the healthcare system and not in the ID system. So this kind of a federated architecture ensures that there is no concentration of data with one agency. There is a UIDAI bill which we had proposed that is currently with the Indian Parliament and will be presumably taken up at some stage. But in the meantime, the process has gone to the Supreme Court, and a lot of checks have been put in to ensure that government usage of this data is minimized, and it's really an empowerment tool in the hands of the people who have an ID so that they can get more benefits. Just one quick word, the technology backbone used for this was using internet architecture. So because we wanted to build a system for billions of people, so we used it using the latest internet architecture like open source technology, essentially like Linux and Hadoop and all that. And the project cost is about maybe about $1.5 billion so far. And just the savings in the LPG subsidy alone has been estimated by the government to be about $2 billion in 1 year. So 1 year savings in one program has essentially more than paid for this entire infrastructure. So every use of that now is just free because it's all been paid for by the system. And the technology came in at a little over around $1 per person which is a very, very low cost implementation of such a complex technology. As I said, now with the smartphone having the biometric, we can now implement single click two-factor authentication, where one factor is the mobile phone and the second factor is Aadhaar. And we are in the process, people in India are working on building these phones, and using that we'll be able to do one click two-factor authentication, which is the holy grail of combining security with convenience. And that's going to be key to, for example, electronic payments from mobile to mobile, which India is expected to launch in the next 3 to 4 months. Therefore, using the Aadhaar as a platform, we have built what is called as the India stack. The first layer of the stack is authentication, where I can use Aadhaar to authenticate somebody. The second layer is eKYC, where I can use it to open a bank account or get a SIM card with the KYC, know your customer details. The third stack is using it as a way to do a digital signature of a document. So Aadhaar can be used to sign a document, so you can make it paperless. The fourth is design of a repository system where documents can be securely kept and retrieved using an ID like Aadhaar, which call that as a digital locker. Then we have built, the NPCI is building a payment system on top of that for mobile payments. And then a consent architecture is being designed where I use my ID to authorize the use of my data for a particular benefit. So this whole thing is called as the India stack. And this entire stack is a public good. It's not controlled by a private company, unlike in the US where three or four private internet companies control all these things. This is a government open stack that any innovation can use. And this is very fundamentally, we think that identity and authentication should not be controlled by large private companies which are not accountable, but should be in the hands of an accountable, responsible state. So that's what has happened so far. So I think this is a very important milestone in identity. We think that it's hugely transformational, and we expect to see many, many users of that. And so I hope you got a sense of what we've done in Aadhaar. And now I'll stop here and take questions, Jacqueline.
Thank you very much indeed, Nandan, for that talk. So I think we'll ask people to come forward and ask questions. Do we have a mic? Oh, come to the mic. Okay. So would anybody like to start?
Let them just introduce themselves also, Jacqueline.
Pardon?
Let them also introduce themselves. So.
Yes, please introduce yourselves and ask your questions.
Hi, Nandan. I'm Deborah Rose. Thank you very much for participating. What's been really wonderful is having all of the presenters speaking with each other. And one of the things, and I also talked with AJ on the way over here, and he explained that yes, you have legacy systems in India, but you decided to not use any of them. Yesterday we had Joanne Barnhart, who had been a commissioner of the US Social Security system, saying there are still legacy systems that they can't undo or get around. So since you have really implemented the model that we all aspire to, what advice would you have for anything from the Icelandic system, the Norwegian system, or the American system? If we wanted to transfer, how do we do that?
Well, that's a big question. And, we had the advantage that there was no legacy system in India. I mean, there were some ID systems like passports and driver's license and PAN cards, but none of them had the scale. None of them were online. None of them were unique, and so on. So we had a lot of issues, a lot of challenges. That's why we said, let's start and build a de novo system and use biometric deduplication to do that. Now, see, I think in the Western world, identity is not such an issue in the way it is in developing countries, because you have a robust birth certification system. People have a birth certificate, that's the basis for citizenship. Then they have driver's license, all those things. So, and of course you have the SSN in the US. So it's not clear to me whether you need to do the way it's done, but if you need to have a unique digital ID, then you need to use the Aadhaar approach. Today in the US, these digital IDs are being done by private companies. which means that they have complete knowledge about which application you use, which website you go, and so on. So I personally believe that ID should be a public good, not in the control of private companies. And the authentication of that ID should also be a public good. But that's a point of view. If people don't believe in that, then there is no traction for any ID system in the developed world. Certainly in the developing world, I think this is very, very important, and they can do it along the same approach that Aadhaar has taken.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi. Justin Hughes, PA Consulting. I was just wondering, could you speak a bit to the project was conceived in 2006, before the iPhone was even out. Could you speak a bit about how you sort of try to future-proof the system and what things you try to build into the system, and how you're doing that today, from obviously going from a simple unique ID through to financial transactions now, and where you see this going in the future as technology moves so quickly?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the government started the idea in 2006, and the project got approval in January 2009, and I joined in July 2009. And I mean, the government it was really only about giving a unique ID to residents. It didn't really get into the technology issues. But the original set of people who designed this system, both from the government and from the outside, we looked at platforms like the internet, which over 40 years has become such a enormously transformational technology, or GPS, which is the basis for your maps and for your Uber and all that. And we said, is there a way to think of ID in a similar way, where we platformize it and allow layers and layers to build on that? So we designed the APIs. We designed them as open APIs. So we have one API for authentication using the biometric, and one API for the KYC. And these APIs are essentially XML based, so they can be called from a smartphone and so on. So when we started the 08, the iPhone had just started in 2007, June, I think, and the Android was just coming around. The iPad didn't exist. But because of our layered approach, because of using APIs, because of thinking of as a layer, it can actually work with any device in the future. For example, tomorrow it could be, Google Glass or something. It doesn't matter. So it's all API driven. And we also realized that layering it also helps in building new capabilities. So the payment system was built a year or so after we designed it. We just designed it as a layer on top of that. And now the mobile payment system that's now being designed is layered on that. So I think we looked at what we call as an hourglass architecture, which is what the internet and GPS are, and try to model it in simplicity and layering, and try to make it as future-proof as possible.
I wonder if I could ask you a question, Nandan. Over the last 2 days, we've been talking a lot about concerns about privacy, and there's been a sort of a polarization in a way between those who really celebrate the inclusive potential of identification systems as you described it, and those who are very concerned about the dangers of having sort of identity indicators available to government or to other potentially intrusive agents. Now, the way you've described Aadhaar, it seems that this is not a concern, but some have still argued that the system is vulnerable to intrusion. I know Ajay spoke about some of this litigation that's ongoing in India right now, and the robust response so far, both from, of course, from the Aadhaar organization itself, but also so far from the Supreme Court. But do you have any concerns or any thoughts about how sort of secure and how impervious to privacy invasion the system is?
Yeah, I think a lot of thought has gone into making it robust and designed for privacy. Part of it is in the architecture itself, and saying that the Aadhaar system is not trying to collect all the data about you. It's just an ID system that you can use to authenticate. and the actual data about you continues to be in the healthcare system or the banking system or whatever system it is. So part of it is in the design, part of it is in in the design of security, encryption, and so on. Part of it is obviously technological solutions, and obviously it also has to be supported by a legal framework for which the UIDAI bill is there in Parliament. At the same time, I think the Supreme Court has put down a very good framework of how Aadhaar can be used or not used. So I think a lot of that is there. I personally feel that this is far better than what you have today in the United States. In the United States, you have 3 or 4 large private companies who know everything about you, and the government has a backdoor into them, so they can get the data from the private companies. So you have the worst of both worlds. At least this is a system which is clear about its goal.
Hello, my name is Kanchi Gandhi. I'm also from Bangalore. Because of your talking, that's why I came here today. I'm a biologist from Bangalore. In spite of the national ID and the government schemes online, is it more beneficial to the government or to the public? The reason I'm asking is there are so many schemes online, but for the common people, they are not able to get any benefit easily. So what I'm wondering is, who gets a higher benefit, the government or the consumer?
No, in fact, I would say the consumer a lot more than the government, because this entire thing has been designed with the resident in mind. And essentially what it does is allows you to redesign both government and private services to be paperless, so it's fully electronic, presence-less, which means you don't have to go to a physical office, you can do it on your cell phone, and cashless, because you can make a digital payment from your account to somebody else. The whole architecture is designed to be paperless, presence-less, and cashless, which means that you can develop a whole slew of public and private services which a person can either do from their own phone or go to a local agent who has a device on which you do it. So it is a massive improvement in convenience and productivity for the person. I mean, to give one example, if you have 1 million micro ATMs where people can withdraw money from a grocery store in the village, instead of them traveling 40 kilometers to a nearest town to withdraw money and wasting a whole day, they can get money in the in a store in the village. So that's massive convenience for the person. So the entire thing has huge convenience for the people. The main benefit from a government perspective is efficiency in delivery. So it reduces wastage, which in turn means that if you save several $billion in money being misspent, that money can further be given as benefits to genuine beneficiaries. So it's very much a pro-citizen or pro-resident approach to design.
Hello, I'm Prisca Castañer. I come from Northeastern University. And my question to you is, what happens with those who are illiterate and hence cannot open an account in a bank? In which ways, other than accessing social services, do they benefit? And also, what happens to those who are in the very poorest areas of India that are very difficult to access? Thank you.
Well, the fact of the matter is that 935 million people today have an Aadhaar, and many people tell me that they have gone into remote corners of India, small villages, areas where there's extremism and all that, and everybody there has an Aadhaar. So clearly, because of the unique approach we took of having 30,000 enrollment stations where somebody could just lug a enrollment station and go to a village and so on, it's actually probably has had the biggest reach of anything, including the mobile phone. I would say that Aadhaar reach is probably bigger than anything else in India today. with 935 unique people having an Aadhaar. Now, in terms of, obviously there are challenges of illiteracy and all that, but the process of opening a bank account is simple, and if there are then businesses who want to open a bank account, they can take the device to the house of the person and they can do an online authentication and open the account. The system is multilingual. It works in every Indian language. So your name can be in English, Hindi, Kannada, Gujarati, or Oriya, whatever. So and it's very simple. It's just name and address. So there's a lot of things. Obviously, you can't fix every social problem, but it's designed for inclusion and allowing people to open bank accounts even if they're illiterate.
According to what you're saying, microcredit entities would be not important anymore.
What's that?
Microcredit entities, which were born, in fact, to give financial service access to the poorest of the poor in the developing world, would not be necessary anymore, according to what you're saying.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that microcredit was a way to deliver small loan ticket items to lots of people, either using self-help groups or the other joint liability kind of groups. They will continue to have a role in the system because you still need organizations that go out there and meet people and give them loans and so on. But their job will be considerably accelerated or simplified or made convenient using technology. So the actual ground structure of the market, some banks, some microfinance working as partners of banks, all that is likely to happen. In addition, in the Indian system, the regulator has introduced two types of what are called as differentiated banks. One is the payment bank, which can only do payments, and the other is the small bank, which can only do small loans. And many of the microfinance institutions have become small banks. They've got about 11 of the microfinance guys have become small banks. So all these new players are going to come and they'll all use a common technology to dramatically lower the cost of transactions and improve the convenience to people. The final shape of the market, I don't know, but it'll generally, see, you're taking a world from a high cost, low volume, high transaction value environment, which is exclusionary, to a low cost, high volume, low transaction value environment, which is inclusionary. That's the fundamental change that technology of this type will bring.
Last question over here, please.
My name is Siddharth George, and I'm a PhD student at the economics department. What challenges do you see for the rollout of mobile money transfer systems, which are kind of crucial to DBT's using DBT realizing its full potential? Thank you.
Well, I think we should separate DBT from mobile transfers, in the sense the current system where an Aadhaar number is linked to a bank allows you to already do a direct benefit transfer. And as you know, in the LPG alone, 120 million people are getting direct benefit transfer, and the transaction volume is about 1 billion a year. So that can continue. So what it means is that money is going digitally into somebody's account. Now, in the first phase, you have to make it easy for them to withdraw money from their account, which is why having a network of 1 million micro ATMs, which are there in every grocery store or some local guy, is very important for ease of use to withdraw money from your account, because people will still want physical cash. The next stage is to allow digital to digital, which means that rather than converting money from an account into physical cash, can I just make an electronic payment from one account to another account? And ideally, I should do that using my mobile phone. For that purpose, the NPCI is launching a thing called Unified Payment Interface, where I'm an advisor to them. This is being launched in the next 2 to 3 months, which will allow any mobile payment account to any mobile payment account, in real time. And once that happens, you will have both person to merchant as well as person to person transactions going digital. And then you get the full value of this jam, this whatever you guys call Jandan Aadhaar Mobile, which combines the power of Aadhaar, the power of mobile, and the power of bank account. Because we expect everybody will have an Aadhaar, it's already close to 1 billion. Everybody will have a phone, of which more than 500 million will be smartphones. And everybody will have a bank account, either because of the government's Jandan program or because the new 21 payment banks and small banks will open accounts. So once everybody has the bank account, the Aadhaar and the mobile, and all the three are integrated with the technology we are building, I think you'll see a lot of the digital money and all that happening.
Nandan, thank you very much indeed. This has been, as always, very illuminating, and we hope to have you here very soon. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Have a great conference. All the best.
Welcome to Panel 6, Inclusion and Exclusion, Ethical and Human Rights Implications for Identification Systems in the Context of Statelessness. My name is Doug Johnson. I'm the director of the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy here at the Harvard Kennedy School. We co-sponsor this conference, but to be said, we did nothing except guarantee the use of this room. And I want to congratulate Jackie for pulling this off and bringing such an incredible group of people together. So welcome to the Kennedy School. So we have 3 very interesting panelists today. They'll each speak 15 or 20 minutes, and that would project that we would have at least a half hour for conversation with each other, which I will try and ensure happens. I'll introduce all 3 of you, and then in the order in which you'll present, and then we'll get started. I want to, first of all, welcome Andrew Hopkins, who is a senior registration officer at the UNHCR, the High Commissioner for Refugees. He's based in Geneva, and he currently leads UNHCR's program on global registration and identification management efforts. He has a long, distinguished career, which you have in your bios, so we'll save the time for that. Immediately to my left, Margaret or Magda Matake, who is a Roma rights activist from Romania, and she's been here for 3 years as a Hauser postdoctoral fellow at the FXB Center at the School of Public Health, where she is also working as an instructor. She has extensive experience in the advocacy and NGO realm as well, that will help us understand some of the tensions between protection and identity. And finally, a very noted investigative reporter and author, Edwin Black, whose books I think are over here on the left. They look really intriguing. He has made a career really looking at the issues of power and abuse of power in many realms, very strong emphasis and interest in human rights, broadly spoken, with many subfields. So a noted author, and Edwin will be our 3rd speaker today. And then we'll get into questions. So Andrew, are you keyed up?
Yeah.
Okay, go for it.
Morning, everyone. I'm sorry that I was running a little late this morning. I was quite busy with the Syrian work that we're doing right now in identity management. I had a call from my boss this morning asking me to hurry up and get some papers together for how we do identity management in the context of Syria. And that's why I missed the first date this morning. I was not able to come. I was busy working on some other things. So apologies, and very nice to be here. Thank you for having me. Today our outline is to look at why UNHCR is involved in identity management, talking a little bit about how far we've come, what our challenges are, and how identity management might look in the future. Excuse me, I'm a little sick. Anyway, let's kick it right off. Why do we have identity management in UNHCR? Well, by our very nature, we're a protection agency, and we need to do our protection work well, and we need to know that the person that is in front of us at any given moment is a person that we registered when they came into the country of asylum. So we have it so we can get on with our protection work, and we can know and be confident that the people that we're assisting are really the people that we want to assist. And we do have a lot of trouble in UNHCR with misrepresentation and fraud, and we'll talk about that a bit later. So this idea of reestablishing identities, I think, is very important, and anchoring them over the time. We've really had quite a hard time doing that initially because we didn't have the tools to do it. So it was basically pencil and paper. Refugees came in, we recorded their data. We didn't know where that data would be put afterwards. They come to see us again and we wouldn't know who they are. So I think this concept of really being able to use data when refugees come to see us and then anchor it so that we can preserve the identities is key to doing our protection work. And once we have the identities in the system, in our databases, then we start doing really well. So how far have we come? This is a picture of where my grandfather used to work. It's the Pier 21 in Canada. And I think your equivalent is Ellis Island. There's my grandfather, 1944. He's processing refugees that had come just during and post-war. And there I am in the left, 58 years later, processing Somali Bantus. And you'd really think that, the refugee crisis would have ebbed a little bit and gone down, but it hasn't. It's been crazy. And since I started my career processing Vietnamese refugees, it's been really nonstop. Cyclical, but really, you think it's going to end, and then there we are again, dealing with a similar caseload, leaving for different reasons, but the same kind of problems that we have to deal with in assisting people. So over the years, we've seen an ebb and flow in refugee processing that is relentless and unstoppable. Here we have the Rwandan crisis, Tunisia, Libyan border here, I think. There it is again, excuse me. Iraq, and Syrians coming into Iraq, I believe this photo is. And then today, 850,000 arrivals by sea through 2015, 3,485 people dead or missing. Just in that little path, that little area between Turkey and Greece. So we're busy, and we're really having a hard time, but we have to have systems in place, processes in place to make sure that we're doing our job properly, and we work with governments in doing so. So when I started doing identity management, it was all paper-based, working on the Vietnamese caseload out of Bangkok and in Ho Chi Minh City. We were using things like paper and wristbands to really count our populations and make sure that we knew who was who. You can see that they used to be very manual processes, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. And we found that we needed to create standards. In 2003, we really had trouble with standards. And you can see these are all UNHCR situations where we had really bad practices and terrible ways of doing our work. The one on the left is an identity document. You can see a filing solution in Ghana in their office there. And then multiple ration cards issued to refugees so that they could recycle or come round and round again to collect food rations. So really, we were in a bad way back in 2003. So our goal was to up our game, and the donors really insisted upon it. particularly our main partner, the US government, was really adamant about us putting some standards together. So in doing so, we tried to define what registration was. And for us, for UNHCR, registration is the recording, verifying, and updating of information on persons of concern to us, and then with the aim of doing something with that data. So you have to collect the right data to know what to do with it, right? So we were really making sure that back then we wanted to collect the right data for the right objective and make sure we were doing something with that data. So no data collection. When you have thousands and thousands of people coming to you every day, you don't want to be collecting additional data for no reason. So really turning that data around to find solutions for people was our goal. And that was the sort of starting point of our identity management program, I would say. Registration standards. These are the 8 standards that came out of that XCOM conclusion in 2003, which was an agreement we had with governments to improve an area of our work. And these were, broadly speaking, access to registration. How can they come and be registered? The process of registration, defining how it's done. Management of fraud, a big problem for UNHCR with people coming again and again and again. And I'll talk about biometrics a bit later. What data is to be gathered and recorded? So the objective of collecting the data. Providing documentation once refugees are identified. Updating and verifying information. So this idea that we don't throw the records away, but a continuous updating of the same record. Data protection, very important. If data gets into the wrong hands, it can be disastrous, and I've seen it repeatedly in my career, where when data gets into the wrong hands, bad things happen. So particularly in my line of work with refugees, where there can be real problems with data leakages, where we in UNHCR are very, very serious about data protection. And then working with partners, also quite important. So here you see access problems, and they're really quite rudimentary. We have to get out at the front gate. We can't be sitting back in our back offices and sort of, not concerned about how the refugees are being received. So this idea of access seems pretty, like it could be pretty straightforward, but it isn't, because you have to really get out at the very entry point and talk to the refugees about how they're accessing our registration programs. Individual numbers, extremely important. And we had the colleague from Iceland talking about this, I believe it was yesterday. We take this very seriously in UNHCR. It's our first core identity management issue. And we want to make sure that we maintain the individual numbers globally over time so that there's no duplicate. And I want to talk a little bit now about how when you link identity, documentation, and the establishment of identity with entitlement, what happens is that your systems become flawed, because people who attach a benefit to an identity that's immediate, like food rations, they're going to figure out ways to be re-identified repeatedly, right? So we had a really big problem in 2003 with this, with refugees coming through again and again and again with these UNHCR ration cards and just passing the card on to their friends. And we were losing millions and millions of dollars each month on food ration distribution globally. There's the ration card. We still use them, but now we're using them with biometrics, so things are getting better. And typically what we would do is we would round up refugees like this, and then we would put wristbands on them, and then sort of enumerate the people, because we didn't have any biometrics. It was really not a very nice procedure, where you would round them up, put wristbands on them. They would be standing in the hot sun all day, and you'd count them off and make sure there were no duplicate cases. And once a wristband was put on the wrist, well, then we would cut it off as soon as they got registered. I think some of you may be familiar with that practice. This is sort of ancient history for us now. We're not doing it anymore so much. Another really good part of our move to better data management and identity management was the creation of our data management program called Progress. 7 million records are in it now, about 97 countries. And it's really a case management tool, but also one for confirming identity. And it's sort of linked up to a biometric system now, which makes it much more powerful than it used to be. And this is us working in Tanzania. You can see that the progress record has been put on paper. And then, data is updated over time when we have a little bit more time to deal with the family. So in an emergency, we can only take a little bit of data. We give them an individual number, and when we see them again for rations or in a verification activity, then we update the data, and we use these photos on the bottom for identity management purposes, so that when they're taken during the first state of the emergency, the first part of the emergency, we have those photos at the bottom of the page, and when the refugees come and visit us again, we know who's who. So it's a pretty rudimentary step in identity management without biometrics. Once you have good data, of course, you can do lots of things like birth registration, food distribution, and camp management. So we use our data for just about everything in managing the refugee life cycle through time. Documentation, also very important to us. This idea that you just record the data and keep it. I know that our Iceland colleague was talking about everybody knowing their number. Well, with our refugees, really they don't. So we give them a document, and that document gives them a legal status. So when they're stopped in the street by a policeman, they can show something that says that they have legal status in the country. So here's a document issuance procedure in Iran, Colombia. Not sure where that is. Identity cards provided in West Africa. And this is an exercise, this is actually one of the photos I took in 2003, quite some time ago, where we issued individual identity documents to persons of concern. And what was so fantastic about that was that I went back there about a year later, and I said, what are you doing with those ID cards? Are they of any use to you? And they were effusive with the benefit brought by having maybe the first document they ever had in their life, right? So they said they could open bank accounts. They said they could leave the camp. They had freedom of movement with these cards. Really a fantastic result. So individual documentation for us is a cornerstone also of identity management. And finally, for returns, very, very important. These are trucks going back home with refugees in them, and we would have manifests created from our databases so that we could identify those people that we were sending back and make sure we had the right ones going. So I have a short video for you, and it really is a video about how we've moved on from those times. And if you could go ahead, please.
In a remote refugee camp in western Thailand, with no electricity, phone coverage, or access to the internet, an unlikely digital revolution is changing lives. Ban Mai Nai Soi Camp. More than 10,000 Myanmar refugees live here, some for a generation. Soon, they'll be sharing technology used at London's Heathrow Airport. The technology is biometrics. The goal is to capture something vital to these people, a confirmed identity. Doug Green is UNHCR's Chief Information Officer. He's here to oversee the deployment of the new system.
This exercise in Thailand is critical for UNHCR. This is the first major rollout of the biometric systems. We will verify and enroll 120,000 refugees.
First, the team verifies the completeness of a refugee's documents. Then they add biometric information. Fingerprints, iris scans, photos, all attached to a name, a date of birth. Everything is uploaded onto UNHCR's global database. Now every refugee has a record of his or her identity forever. Sam Jeffries is a biometrics expert.
Biometrics will help refugees in the future, as it ensures that once they've been through the system and have enrolled with their fingerprints and their irises, we always know who they are. If they lose their documentation, with a global database of 10 million records, within 10 seconds we can assure someone's identity from their fingerprints or eyes alone.
There were many hurdles on the way to this digital revolution, including getting to the camp. The advanced team had to transform a dusty football pitch into a high-tech enrollment center within 24 hours. That meant bringing in tents, generators for electricity, a satellite terminal to connect to the outside world. They worked around the clock. They had to make the system work in one of the world's most remote areas. More than 100 UNHCR staff and Thai government partners were trained to do verification and capture biometrics. They honed their skills in simulations with the authorities.
Our coordination has been on 3 fronts. The original verification team in Thai operation, matching it with our biometrics team, but also matching it with those who know the community, so you can schedule the right number of people from the sections of the camp for the right days.
Although there were numerous problems, the implementation was a success. The team biometrically enrolled 3,000 refugees in 10 hours. It took just a week to enroll the entire camp, 10,000 refugees.
One of the daunting challenges I have is right now my team is in the jungles of Thailand. In 4 weeks we'll be in the deserts of Chad. So we have to take the lessons learned that we've collected from Thailand, apply them quickly, and hit the ground in Chad, where we're going to enroll 450,000 refugees over a 9-month period.
Information will be gathered in 9 camps in Thailand along the 2,400-kilometer-long border with Myanmar.
This effort will enable us to use donor dollars more efficiently. Most importantly, however, we will be able to provide protection and assistance to refugees who need it the most.
This is just the beginning. UNHCR plans to capture refugees' biometrics in many countries this year, in all its operations by 2018. The task is enormous, and the need great. There are more refugees and displaced people now than at any time since the Second World War. To help them, to know who they are, to give them support now and in the future, UNHCR must use the most modern tools available.
So this is a project that I've been very closely working on for quite some time. With my colleague Justin, who's in the audience, he did a great job helping us with the tool, so I'm glad Justin came today. What's surprising about the exercise is how positive the refugees are about having their identities established through biometrics. The reaction is not one of paranoia, not one of confusion, but one of very positive interaction with the populations of concern to collect their identities and document them. If we could just go back to the PowerPoint. Yeah, good. Okay, I'm going to wrap up really soon. So the added value of biometrics, I think is pretty clear. Better identity management, preservation of identities, increased donor confidence, more accurate aggregation of global statistics, and the reduction in fraudulent behaviors, which is hugely problematic for us. Not to misrepresent identity, but to collect food multiple times or benefits. So it's not sort of a small scale problem. What will identity management be tomorrow? Maybe this is something we would like to discuss amongst ourselves. For UNHCR, it's really to replace duplicate systems, look at data sharing, because we have a lot of congruous systems around, and then mobile technology is very important to us. We also do a lot of resettlement of our refugee populations, and they are submitted by UNHCR to the United States of America and other resettlement countries. And what we're really trying to work on now is making sure that the American government understands that when we see a refugee, we take their identity very, very important, and we make sure that we're anchoring that identity. And then when we present the case to the United States, we are confident that the person that we saw 10 years ago, when they came and fled their countries of origin, is the same person that we're putting up for resettlement to third countries. Thank you very much.
Okay, Magda is really going to give us a focus on a particular case study and the issues of identity among the Romani people. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you so much for the introduction. I would kindly ask our colleagues to put up. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Mahader, Jackie, colleagues at FXB, and the Harvard Kennedy School for putting up this wonderful event. And offering us a space to discuss this important issue in times of global crisis with strong implications on identification, identity, and rights of refugees, migrants, and people around in vulnerable situations around the world. In my presentation today, I'll try to talk about the Roma situation in Europe, and I will add to this conversation some ways in which national identification systems have shaped the Roma social, political, and legal identity in different corners of Europe. I have to say that initially I just wanted to build on Andrew's presentation and to talk about undocumented Roma in Europe and reasons for that. But then I realized that in my experience with working with Roma populations in Europe, legal registration is just a part of a very complex puzzle. And in order to discuss Roma, we have to look at different aspects in which national identification systems and governments influence the Romani population. In the case of historically marginalized groups like my people, the Roma, I think once we discuss registration and legal registration, we also have to look at ways in which governments play with registration and threaten or exterminate or use this registration against population. And there is no dichotomy there. People would say that, well, these are two conflictual issues, but I think that legal registration is as important as working on making sure that governments do not use this registration against a certain population. And I'll talk about the Roma in Europe, but this is a very diverse population. And this population does not live only in Europe, but is rather a global population. Oftentimes, people talk about us as being non-territorial, as being nomads, or as being stateless. There are more exotic words for us as well, but I won't get there. But what I'm saying is that for centuries, ever since Roma moved to Europe about 1,000 years ago, their identity shaped in so many ways. So basically, we can talk about a stolen Roma identity, and this is a legal stolen Roma identity because oftentimes governments and society, instead of calling us Roma, they call us gypsies or Zigeuners or Tzigans, depends what country you live in. And there has been such a great work of Romani activists to push for the real identity of the Roma, which is, Roma. And then there is a hidden social identity of these populations because based on the experience of the Holocaust and other negative reactions from the population, Roma in different countries, they learn to hide these identities. So if you want to register them as Roma, many of them would say that they are not Roma. They would say that they are Turkish, Spanish, and they will invent all these identities that do not belong to themselves. And then in many situations, especially nowadays, we have a large group of Roma people who are citizens of their countries. But I think that even in the case of citizens, if we expect that their rights will be realized in these countries, I'll show you later on in this presentation that they do have a lot of problems in these countries. And once again, I think that we don't have to look at identification either as a right or a threat, but I think these two elements are very important. And as Thomas Hammonberg mentioned in 2012, there are tens of thousands of Roma people in Europe who do not have any nationality. But also what happened back in 2010 was that the Minister of Immigration and Integration in France, he said that they will start up a biometric system which will allow the French government to detect repeated requests from repatriation assistance from requests coming from different Roma people, and as a result, they decided to fingerprint Romani population in France, but I'll talk about that one later on. So let me just start with the basics. There are a lot of stateless Roma in Europe. The Commissioner for Human Rights at the Council of Europe mentioned a few years ago that there are probably 80,000 Roma that have no identity papers in Europe. Other people talk about actually about millions of Roma without IDs and birth certificates on the territory of Europe. In Italy, we have about 15,000 stateless children. In Kosovo, 40% of the Roma, Ashkali, and Egyptian population have no registration. And in my country, in Romania, back in the 90s, we had about 3% of the Roma population having no registration document. And I think this was a moment in which also for the sake of trying to access into the European Union, but also acknowledging the needs, the Romanian government has started several projects in order to register Romani population. And here I want to stop and just share with you one of the experiences that I had back then. So at the end of 90s and the beginning of 2000, I was working at community level. So I was kind of a community organizer trying to work with Roma people in certain communities in Bucharest and help them get IDs. What I noticed back then was that it was not just a matter of bureaucracy and how many problems were related to that in order to obtain IDs for the Roma, but it was also a matter of equal treatment and discrimination. And oftentimes, I myself, I had to go with the Roma person to the authorities and negotiate the right to get an ID. So I think in that context of registration, this element of discrimination and unfair treatment from the state institutions or the representatives of the state institutions has to be taken into account. And then we talk about Europe, and this is a fairly wealthy, developed region. And many of the countries, especially those in the European Union, where it happens that the majority of Roma population lives, in these countries we do have a lot of policy gaps, and we do have policy biases. And I'll just talk about two situations in which I think that the breakup of the states or war situation led Roma people to lacking citizenship or struggling with different notions of citizenship. I think one first situation is in Kosovo, post-war. And in this region, many Roma face different problems. Some of them do not have registration. As I mentioned, 40% of them are not registered. But along with that, there is a situation that the governments of Kosovo and Serbia put in place, and that affects Romani population dramatically. And this is because there is a dual system of managing Kosovo after the war. So basically, Serbia manages the Serbian population in Kosovo, and all the institutions serve the Serbian population, and the government in Pristina manages the Albanian population. But Roma is somehow in the middle of this dual system. And what happens is that there are schools that are separated. So the Serbian kids will go to a Serbian school, and the school will benefit from financing from the Serbian government itself. And then the Albanian school kids, they will go to these Albanian schools, and is the Albanian government managing the funds. In order to go to a Serbian school, you need a Serbian birth certificate. For the Albanian schools is not the case, but for the Serbian population is a little bit more complicated. And in this context, I think that Roma population is the one that has to suffer, because in order to get an ID or a birth certificate from Serbia, Romani families, they have to travel from Kosovo to Serbia, which is not an easy travel, and to get that birth certificate. I think that some of the families that we met in Kosovo 2 years ago, when Jackie and I went to Kosovo to discuss with different communities, some of the families, they told us that they have to go every 6 months to Serbia in order to get these IDs, and of course they lack financing, and they are also afraid to travel all the time from Kosovo to Serbia. So that's one of the situations, and in Kosovo, I think, along with the problem that really leads to lack of access to schools of Romani population, we also have a lot of Roma that will have a dual identity. So they also play with this identity a little bit, because I think it's more of a mechanism of survival. And then there is another country, which is Czech Republic, and back in 1993, what happened was that after Czechoslovakia split in two countries, Czech Republic and Slovakia, the Czech government in Slovakia, in Czech Republic, decided to give citizenship only to the Czech people living in Czech Republic. So basically, they left about 100,000 Roma without citizenship, because many of them were declared Slovak citizens back in 1969, I think. So that was a moment in which Slovakia didn't want to give them citizenship, and Czech Republic said you have to apply for citizenship in this country. So for several years, a lot of the Roma population, they just didn't have any sort of citizenship. Then there is another situation, which is Italy. And in Italy, Roma are called nomads. So we have a population of about 120,000 Roma living in Italy, and although they live there for generations, they are settled, they are nomads because the Italian authorities keep them in camps. So they live in separated camps, and this is the reason why they are called nomads. Identification is a threat oftentimes for Roma, and I mentioned that. We had instances of forced sterilization of Romani women in Sweden. We had a lot of instances of forced sterilization in Czechoslovakia, and not to mention the Holocaust, which led not only to forced sterilization, but also to the extermination and deportation of many Romani people. Now, moving to the current situation in Europe, I think we have ways in which governments use these national identification systems to go against Romani population. And we have two countries that are part of the European Union and that have to comply with the regulation of the Freedom of Movement Directive of the European Union. But what happens is that back in 2008 and then in 2010, both Italy and France, they decided to fingerprint Roma, but not for the sake of helping them, but for the sake of making sure that if they are deported from these countries, they will not have the chance to go back. And finally, here is Sweden in 2015, and I think I have to say that Sweden is one of the most progressive countries when it comes to Roma. Back in 2012, they opened a whole commission working on the issue of historic injustice against this population. But what happens is that in 2015, in South Sweden, some police officers made a complaint saying that in one city, the police people have a legal registry of Roma population in that part of the country. The ombudsman of Sweden took over that case, and what he found out was that the police was trying to map social and family networks, Roma social and family networks that they suspected of crime. So what they had was a registry of 4,000 people, out of which 1,235 were children. So basically not with any sort of record of criminality. So what I'm saying is that I do not advocate for not registering populations. What I advocate for is to look at these two perspectives, the right to legal registration and the threat that some national governments put on different marginalized populations, and to make sure that these two lead together to the realization of rights of different populations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Edwin, please.
Hello, everybody. This has been a marvelous conference. I'm Edwin Black, the author of IBM and the Holocaust. I'm going to make a 2-hour presentation in 19.5 minutes. And then when it's all over, we've got a few books off to the side in case anybody wants them. I'm grateful for all the organizers and the presenters of this conference. What we're going to discuss now is how IBM co-planned and co-organized all 6 phases of the Holocaust. They did it consciously under the direct micromanagement of its president, Thomas J. Watson, directly from New York City, and later from its overseas offices in Paris and elsewhere in Europe. And of course, Watson, who I know is a game show device now, was a convicted extortionist before he ever came to IBM, since he was convicted of blackmail and extortion in the National Cash Register case. So what the Holocaust that you know of, with 6 million dead, is actually the IBM Hollerith Holocaust, because they organized so much of it. And what I mean to say is they organized all 6 phases of the Holocaust: the identification of the Jews, the exclusion from society, the confiscation of their assets, the ghettoization, the deportation, and even the extermination of the Jews. In fact, the famous Auschwitz tattoo began its existence as an IBM number. Now, how did all of this work? When Hitler came to power on January 30th, 1933, he wanted to destroy all of the Jewish community of Germany, of Europe, indeed of the world, and that required the resources of a computer. But a computer did not exist in 1933. What did exist was the Hollerith, the IBM Hollerith punch card, which stored information in the holes that were punched in rows and columns, and then those could be run through a reader to give lots of information on any person, any process, and any place. Prior to the Hollerith punch card, you could count an organization, an assemblage like this, on your hands and toes, but you wouldn't be able to say how many were men, and how many were women, and how many were from the subcontinent, and how many were Jewish, and how many had educations. And so what we see here is that the information age was not born in Silicon Valley, as I'm going to show you, but was born in Berlin in 1933. And what is the information age? It's not what you think it is. It's the individualization of statistics. It's, can you take a statistic, just a number, 200 people in the room, and out of that number, give us individual stories. So how did it work in practice? When Hitler wanted to destroy the community, IBM thought, this is our chance. They went after Hitler and they said, we are the solutions company. We'll give you any solution you want, including the final solution. What would you like to happen? He says, well, I'd like to know where all the Jews are. How many Jews are in Europe? Because we got these Jews with the funny curls and the fur hats, and we know that they're Jews, and we've got these other Jews in synagogues, but in fact, we don't believe that a Jew is someone who's practicing the Jewish religion. We believe a Jew is a Jew with blood, meaning Ras und Blut, race and blood, because they adopted the Carnegie Institution definition of what a Jew was. That is a Jew with one drop of blood going back several generations. And so that was easy. Watson, who visited Berlin to oversee the operation several times a year, invented the first racial census. They hired tens of thousands of people. They went door to door, and they took everybody's information. They wrote it down on paper, and then they all congregated them in a warehouse in Berlin, and they punched it in day and night, and this is how they did it. In one column, they would put, what is your nationality? Are you a German? Are you a Pole? Are you Hungarian? In a second one, what is your mother tongue? Are you speaking French? Are you speaking Yiddish? Are you speaking German? What is your religion? Are you a Muslim? Are you a Catholic? Are you a Jew? Are you a Protestant? In the next one, what is your profession? And then what is your city? And at the rate of 64,000 cards per hour, just like that, suddenly, Germany knows exactly how many Jews of Polish extraction in Berlin are engaged in the legal profession. And that's the beginning. So now we've got the first part. Next, what do? Well, we want to exclude them from society. Take all those names from the census, and it was not just about one census. It was ongoing census, registration, re-registration, continuing process. And juxtapose that against the Bar Association, the Medical Association, the faculty roles, the military organizations. Exclude all the Jews from those professions. Now exclusion. 3, now what we want to do is we want to confiscate all of their assets. That's easy. All the banks in Germany are running on IBM punch cards. So they take all those names, they assemble all the bank accounts, and immediately, after a little bit of programming, they assess a 25% confiscation fee called a flight tax, and eventually they penalize, criminalize, and Aryanize all the rest of the assets. Step 4, that's easy, ghettoization. Now we want to push the Jews into a corner. One day, all the Jews go from their comfortable houses across town into a bombed out slum, 8 families to an apartment. Everybody knows their street, everybody knows the number, everybody knows the stairwell, everybody knows the floor, and everybody knows the apartment number. Now that's traffic management, all in one day. Now that they're in the ghettos, they just step out of their house and are involved in deportation, subjected to deportation. All the trains in Europe are running on IBM punch cards. So they step out of the ghetto, they go 1, 2, 3 days to Auschwitz, they are unloaded, and within 40 minutes, they're dead. No waiting. And they got to organize this, because millions of Europeans of all professions, religions, and categories went in and out of thousands of concentration camps and subcamps, but the one-day capacity was only 235,000 people. And then, when they were gassing these people at the rate of thousands a day, Himmler said, we can't just kill all these people, we got to get one more thing out of them. Let's get some work. So IBM invented the extermination by labor campaign. First they'd get your profession. Well, let's see, you're a metal worker, you're a construction worker, you're a dentist, you're a farmhand. We'll cross-tabulate that against all the slave labor that we need. We need people to farm, to build a barracks, to work in infirmary. We move them across the continent on the IBM transfer list. And when they're too weak to work anymore, we gas them. And there was an IBM customer site in every concentration camp. So you can step over there to the big library at Harvard and see if there's any books that mention that. And there aren't. The name of the IBM customer site was the Hallerith-Abteilung, the Hallerith Department, and it was associated with the Arbeitseinsatz, which is the Labor Assignment Office. So now I've accused IBM and its president, Thomas J. Watson, of genocide, of deliberately working for 12 years to mass murder the Jews and many other Europeans. So because I only have a short amount of time, I thought I'd bring some evidence. Is evidence okay? Would you like to see some? Okay. So I brought a few pieces of evidence. Now I'm going to show you, I've got 20,000 documents. Let me save your first question. IBM doesn't deny this. And I brought a number of documents with me. And you can see all these later on. This is a typical prisoner card called a Häftlingskarte. Excuse me for not having a PowerPoint, but I'm not that advanced. And when I went to the Bundesarchiv, they said, Mr. Black, there's nothing about this that has a punch card to it. You're barking up the wrong tree. But if you look at it carefully, a Häftlingskarte is a prisoner card. You'll see here the words Hal zu Ab. Hallerith was the trade name of the punch card, like Mac is for Apple, and it says that's the Hallerith number going in and out. Here it says verschlüsselt for the number, which is German for keyed in, and Lochcard geprüft, punch card verified. They ran it against a punch card system. And what was the operator number on this one? 6. Operator 6, correct. Now, you look at this further, and we see here the words Kripo. Do you see that? And do you see the number what? 2. Number 2. And what word is that? Dachau, and what is that? 3. So, okay, would you hold that? Step up here. Now we've got the prisoner cards, and we compare them to the secret IBM concentration camp list. And here we have Kripo, criminal Polizei. There were 2 major forms of Polizei. Geheimstaatspolizei, which is Gestapo, and criminal Polizei, and you see Kripo is 2. Now, do you see, and I'll pass this around, Gestapo is, and what number is Gestapo? 1. And what number is Kripo? 2. And what number is Kripo here? 2. All right, now once IBM is telling the Germans who is arresting you, where are you going? So we got to know which concentration camp. That says Dachau 3, right? And what is Auschwitz? 1. And what is Buchenwald? 2. And what is Dachau? 3. It's the same number as that one. Okay, thanks. Now IBM is informing the Nazis of that. Then the question is, what kind of person are you taking in? Well, they want to know, for instance, her people. And her people are right there. Do you see that Zigeuner? What number is Zigeuner? 12. That means Gypsy, Roma, Sinti. And here is one here. Do you see this word, homosexual? Yes. And what number is that? 2. And so now we want to look at, of these many groups that IBM was tracking, and what number is that one? 8, and that's Juden, yeah, which is Jew. Okay, so IBM knows who arrested you, what kind of person you are, what concentration camp you're going to, and now what is your status? What is your status? Anyone here read German? You, come. Okay, so status number one, let's go to the middle. This guy I found knows a great deal about this topic. All right, status one, entlassen means released.
Okay.
All right, Überstellung, number two, transferred. Gestorben, number three, died from natural causes, being worked to death, sickness. And now, do you see code 6?
Yep.
Do you know what that word means? Sonderbehandlung, gas chamber. That means that IBM engineers had to design a system, had to wire the machines, had to print up the cards, had to train the staff to differentiate between whether a Jew was worked to death, shot to death, or sent to the gas chamber. And then, ladies and gentlemen, they had to service the machines once every 2 weeks on site, right in Auschwitz and every other concentration camp. So now you're saying, okay, Mr. Black, they just didn't know. No one knew all that stuff. That's not true. Everybody knew everything. This was the first genocide with its own PR campaign. Goebbels was the Ministry of Propaganda. And so we'll take here, it wasn't just Ike going through Dachau at the end of the war. Let's take this as the New York Times. The war began September 1939. Warsaw Ghetto was in action. And what is this say for a headline in the New York Times, September 13th? Nazis hint purge of Jews in Poland. What is the subhead?
3 million population involved, removal from Europe viewed as benefit.
3 million to be removed. Okay, and so now, what does this phrase say? Can you read that?
How, however, the removal of Jews from Poland without their extermination can halt the alleged strengthening of Western Jewry is not explained.
Did you say extermination?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so this is September 13th, and let's get Watson's personal correspondence from that same period, of which I have an abundance. Now, you should know that all these international contracts that Watson undertook for IBM, because it was a convicted extortionist, were always done by oral agreements. Because he never wanted a guy like me to meet a guy like you and prove that he had engaged in this. But the Nazis didn't trust him for the commission, so they kept great records, and I got those. So, what is the date of? Can you read that?
No, because I don't speak German.
Deutsche Hallerith-Maschinengesellschaft is the letterhead. That's the German punch card company in Germany. What is the date of that letter?
September 9th, 39.
And who's that letter to?
Thomas Watson.
Thomas Watson. And in here it says they had already connected every person to a number. Now what they needed to do was alphabetize. And they wanted to be able to roll into town at noon and say, okay, that we want everybody here in 4 hours, alphabetical order. So they needed those machines. And what does that phrase there say?
You will understand that under today's conditions, a certain need has arisen for such machines which we do not build as yet in Germany.
All right, so in other words, they don't have the alphabetizers. But as it turns out, what is the memo the next day? Can you read that?
Yesterday morning, Mr. Schott telephoned once more and informed me, obviously pleased, that they had again spoken with America, namely with Mr. Watson and Mr. Oxbury. It had then developed that America had been under a mistaken impression. It had been believed we were yet to be supplied with machines. After this had been cleared up, agreement had been expressed to our keeping the machines I had asked for until further notice on the basis of my proposition.
So in other words, they called up, Watson personally approved, now they had the alphabetizers, and these are the serial numbers of the very first alphabetizers that Watson personally approved. Now, there are many other documents that I have, and one of the things that IBM said was they said, you'll never be able to prove that we were in Auschwitz. Here's the Auschwitz phone book. What is the number of IBM? 4489. Don't call that number, it's been disconnected. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to take up more than the 19.5 minutes given to me, but you may well ask, why did IBM do this? Why did Watson do this? And the answer is, it was never about the anti-Semitism, and it was never about the National Socialism. It was always about the money. So when people like me suggest the words never again, what we really mean is never again should we use our technical prowess, our political muscle, our corporate power to afflict innocent civilians. Thank you very much.
Okay, same thing, though I think it would be faster if people would use the mics by going to stand by them with a question instead of passing it around. Please, your name and affiliation, and if you direct your question to individuals or to the panel as a whole.
Joseph Attic, ID for Africa. This is a question for Andrew Hopkins. Andrew, it is very relevant for us to get an idea about the cost per individual registered in your framework. Registration plus the credentialing, if you could break that out, if that information is available, would be very useful.
Or do you want to collect questions?
No, go ahead.
It's a sliding, excuse me, it's a sliding thing. And our relationship with the supplier is such that when the numbers are low, the costs are high. So it's a sort of a moving thing, which I think Justin, if I'm not mistaken, will average out to about $2 per enrollment, I think. But we, at the beginning, are centralizing all our costs at Geneva headquarters because of the variable costs. And as our populations grow, the licensing fees for individual biometrics is reduced over time. That I'm sorry. I could get back to you, Joseph, on that. I don't have that information with me. I'm sorry.
Hi. Thank you very much for a wonderful panel. My name is Noura Lori. I'm an assistant professor of international relations at Boston University. I learned a ton, and I have a million questions, but I'll ask two. The first is, on this question of getting the UNHCR ID, do you need an ID to get an ID? Or is that the whole point of doing the biometric registration, is that you're eliminating that initial step? And relatedly, what is going on with, I've heard a lot about kids who are born in displacement and are not getting birth certificates. So in that situation in Egypt and Jordan, Lebanon right now, do they have access? And are those identifiers, fingerprints and iris scans, stable over a lifetime? So do infants and adults, does that stay stable, or is there this question of needing something else like DNA? So that's one question. And then relatedly, Margarita, in your yeah, I know, sorry, okay, that's sneaky one. Just what you said about 2008 and 2009 was so striking, that was going on in Paris, because in my research, the registration in the Gulf was happening at the exact same time, 2008, 2009 in the UAE and Bahrain and Kuwait and Saudi. So I'm just wondering about the timing. Is there something going on globally at that time? Thank you.
On the numbers, when a refugee comes and sees us, we don't have an individual number for them yet. That's assigned by our system, and each number is unique. We have, because of our offline situation, we have distributed databases rather than a central one, at least for the time being. And those numbers are assigned as we create the record in the database, and then that number is put on the documentation, and often barcoded even, so that when we have a visit again, we can capture the number and pull up the case very, very quickly.
You're going to have to help me out. What are the other two questions? I can't remember. Yeah, go ahead.
So, in terms of timing, I have to say that a lot of Roma from different Eastern and Central European countries, they used to travel to Western European countries for a better life, but also to escape discrimination and stigmatization. What happened was that in 2007, both Romania and Bulgaria, countries with a large Roma population, they entered in the European Union, and that gave people, including Romani people, the right to travel to France and Italy without many problems. So that was the point in which both the Italian government and also the French government, they got scared because a lot of Romani people would travel to France, and they were settled in different Roma settlements at the margins of cities. France government was running a program of voluntary repatriation of people, in which they would give about 300 euros to each individual who decide voluntarily to travel back home. At the end of each year, what happened that if they didn't have enough voluntary people, then the French police would go in the Roma settlements, because they are compact, they would gather, a large number of people and send them home through that measure. They would go home for Christmas because it was the end of the year. They would return in January. So this was the reason why France wanted to fingerprint them, because it was one of the easiest way to track Roma people to not come back to their countries. But this was illegal, so the European Council and the European Commission, they decided that this would be an infringement of the freedom of movement law if that would happen.
My name is Kanchi Gandhi. I'm in the Department of Biology on campus. So now there are, at least in my time in India, about 35 years ago, there were gypsies moving nomadic from place to place. And they were able to make a living just selling some kind of medicine and some needles, things like that. This is my vague memory. If one makes a DNA analysis, they are light-skinned people, and they do have what we call the Caucasian DNA. This is my opinion, because I'm from biology background, I can say that. So now, I don't know how their babies are born at that time. I mean, they didn't go to hospital. How about presently in Europe? If the babies are born in hospital, don't they get a birth certificate? That's one question. Secondly, about the refugees, I did see the picture returning to their native place or the homeland. The refugees who reach Europe and the Western Hemisphere, does anyone go back, or is it just one-way settlement? Thirdly, about the Holocaust of the past, do we need to learn anything about the present? We all know about the Holocaust, and it was quite informative about the role of IBM in the past. But in the present, should we be scared about any kind of registration of names? Any idea? So these are the three questions.
Yeah, so let's revise our ground rules. One question per person. Arise the most important question rather than everything on your mind, and that's more fair to everyone. But these questions are on the table, and they have the advantage of hitting several of you up here. I think that you could think that the third question was posed to you and everyone. Yeah. Yeah, try it.
Oh, okay, so the question was, should we fear any registration, any number, etc.? First, I'd like to mention that tomorrow morning, Harvard will not get a phone call from IBM saying, how dare you host a conference in which we were accused of genocide. They won't say one thing. And when any of you contact them, they're not going to deny a single word of this. They're just going to say, golly, we just don't remember what happened back then. Now, to your question, the answer is all this technology is Promethean. You don't blame the alphabet because Mein Kampf was written and acted upon. These numbers, as we've seen from this wonderful conference, have a way of nurturing, including, and enabling people. And of course, they can be used as a weapon against people. And so really what you need to understand is it's not about the technology. It's not even about the safeguards. It's those who have the power to control the technology. Because when Germany rolled into Poland, IBM and its denizens went into the post office and went into the universities and set up shop and seized all of that information. So that can be done. Do not fear the number. Fear what can be done with the number when, as he said, it falls into the wrong hands.
On the refugee numbers going into Europe and other countries, look, I'd have to say that refugees want nothing more than to go home. They don't want to leave their country, but they have to. And when they do, there are legal instruments in place which will have them recognized wherever they seek asylum. So if they are recognized under the convention as refugees, then obviously they will gain the benefits and the legal status of people from that country, eventually acquiring citizenship if they stay long enough. So there's a really good record in many countries of that immigration and refugee resettlement path that builds nations. So I think that should be viewed as a good thing.
I would say that for decades now, most of the Roma in Europe have been settled, and they also gave up their crafts, and that happened because of new technologies and new markets, so that they cannot perform those. And therefore, most of the people, they are entitled to get citizenship and to have access to health. What happens in reality is that ever since the Holocaust and even before, governments have not put as much effort into register Roma in order to give them access to health and education, but there was quite a large effort in order to register Roma because they are fear of criminality. For instance, back during the Holocaust in Romania, there was a census that showed clearly who are the Roma in the country, and that made it easier for them to deport Roma. In Germany, there was no such a census, so the Nazi government was involved a lot in putting together some medical experiment and some medical proofs to show who is Roma and who is not Roma in Germany. What happened was that Dr. Ritter back then, who was in charge with this, he finally decided to interview people and ask them if they are Roma or not. So this was the way that the registry of the Roma was put in place. But nowadays, I think most of the Roma are registered. In some countries, you can say clearly that you're a member of this minority group. In other countries, like France, for instance, minority groups do not actually exist, so they are just citizens of France. But that doesn't mean that Roma have access to health. A lot of Roma children in remote communities, they do not have access to hospitals, and they do not have access to healthcare, and they don't have birth certificates because their parents don't have IDs, or they do not have property documents for their houses. So that also influences in some countries the access to a birth certificate.
And I would like to add, you just referenced this vicious Romanian census. In the portfolio that I brought, which I'll show you and anyone can see, you'll see the exact moment in which Watson personally approved the release of 24 machines blocked in Poland, which was under wartime, to move into Romania for that census, and they couldn't get it out, so the only one who intervened was the United States commercial attaché in Berlin, moving those machines out for the census that took your people.
Hello, Juliana Bengoechea from the Open Society Justice Initiative. I wanted to ask Andrew a question. Drawing back to the element of the panel, which is the exclusion and inclusion of statelessness populations. How is progress being used and thought of to address the big data gap that there is on counting stateless populations? I want to cite the UNHCR statistical yearbook, where it says that UNHCR, under its statistical compilation on statelessness, does not include the stateless populations that fall under the protection mandate of other agencies, whereas it also does not include other stateless population that falls under UNHCR's other protection mandates, which includes IDPs, refugees, and asylum seekers. How is that going to be addressed as we move forward within the campaign? Thank you.
Very good question. In fact, one that is interesting to me right now. I'm just moving to Copenhagen and heading up a new section which is called the Identity Management and Registration section. And we're developing new partnerships in the House which deal with those things that we're not doing very well, I would say, right now. These include IDP registration, which is problematic in its own way because of the protection sensitivity of collecting data on internally displaced persons, but also on statelessness, which is not really got its operational legs yet, I would say. And we in registration can bring a lot to bear on that, and I think that you'll be seeing some very interesting partnerships coming up in the new year, where we team up with the statelessness unit and try and get some operational processing capacity going globally in the area of the identification of people who are at threat of statelessness. So really an interesting new way of dealing with those populations.
Hi, I'm Anna Crow from the Human Rights Program at Harvard Law School. My question is also to Andrew, and it relates to the information sharing expectations that host governments have with the existence of progress, and especially the linkage of progress to biometric information, which seems like it would be of a lot of interest to many state security services, and particularly in the context of the Syrian refugee crisis and many of the countries where UNHCR is operating are not party to the Refugee Convention. UNHCR operates on the basis of memorandums of understanding that aren't public. How can refugees know what information about them might be shared with a host government? And related to that, is there a policy in terms of case-by-case sharing of biometric information, or is there a possibility for example, the wholesale sharing of a progress countrywide database with a host government?
Good question. We are struggling with those issues on a practical basis every day, and our team and the team on data protection, which is in a different division, deals with the legal aspects of sharing data with governments. And it's really fraught with problems, and we are very cautious about the wholesale exchange of data with governments. You must remember that registration is the responsibility of governments, and we come in to assist them when we can, and usually that's in many, many locations, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and in the Syrian situation. Now, in Jordan, for example, where I've worked recently, the government does their own biometrics checking, but we have a new data protection policy, and that came out in May. And it really helps us frame up the issues. What we don't have is operational guidance in the area of data protection and protection and privacy issues, consent, all those things. We really need to look at on a I would say a situational basis, and really try to examine and advise operations how they can deal with data sharing questions that come from government. When I was in Thailand just recently, the representative there was concerned about the same thing. What do we do? What do we do when the government asks us for the biometric data, for example? And we have not had that happen yet, but we're trying to frame the issues around these tools. Very often in the development of tools which are built to assist people, we forget that there needs to be a solid framework of the rules in which we can use those tools, and UNHCR struggles with that, I must say, a little bit. But we're playing catch up right now, and I hope my new section will be able to work with the Division of International Protection in Geneva and really start looking at the practicalities of data sharing between governments and ourselves, host governments in particular. Yes. Yeah.
Hi there. My name is Joanna Kuzmova. I'm a refugee lawyer. And again, a question for Andrew. My question is going back to the registration of births. We know that a whole lot of babies are born both in refugee camps and in urban populations. When it comes to biometric information, do you take DNA specimens like swabs and things like that? Would the if the government of the country where a refugee is present is not an asylum country or doesn't register people there, how does UNHCR facilitate any sort of birth registration upon return? Or
birth registration is, again, the responsibility of host governments, right? So we try to promote and facilitate birth registration, and in some countries we've even succeeded in our processes to have a government desk where birth registration issues are recorded on a family basis, you know, so when a new family comes past the desk, the questions are asked about whether they've been certified, whether they've been registered or not, the children. So really we look very hard at helping governments with that, except we're not a legal entity as such in a host country, right? So we can do birth notifications, which can help refugees quite a bit, and asylum seekers too, but and that often is the next step into obtaining a birth certificate. But yeah, it's something that we really struggle with, I would say, because it's not our responsibility formally. But we do try to promote it as best we can with government. It's really a joint thing that we try to do with governments in host countries. Yeah.
Hello. My name is Gabriel Kreindler. I'm a PhD student in economics at MIT. I have a question for Magda. You mentioned 3 situations where there was an abuse or an attempt of abuse at identification, not to protect, but to either expel or do surveillance. So one of them was local, and the other ones had more of a government flavor, and presumably with some level of support, popular support. So in that situation, what are the institutions or organizations that prevent more of these situations from happening, or what are the institutions or organizations that should do more, can do more to prevent them? Is it the EU, NGOs? I don't know.
I think that post-Holocaust, Europe learned a good lesson, and part of the human rights framework in Europe is a result of that. So we have all these human rights institutions, we have directives, we have signed a lot of conventions protecting the rights of people in Europe. This doesn't mean that there are not people that are educated or become racist or extremist in Europe. That's a fact. They exist, and many of them happen to make their way in politics or in a local or national level. And this is the situation in many countries. We have in France, we have in Italy, we have a lot of situations of threat and violence in Hungary as well. So I think that there is a role of the European Union to protect the population, given the anti-discrimination directive and all the human rights directives that the European Union has. But I think that I'm not naive enough to say that the European Union has only a human rights agenda. It's also an economic agenda, and many of the heads of the governments in the European Council decide for some of the next steps. So this is, I think, a conflict that do not help us as much, and therefore there is a need for the NGO community, for other intergovernmental groups and other states to push the rights agenda in Europe, because it is democratic, it has a lot of human rights conventions in place, but there are a lot of situations, especially for Roma populations and now for the refugees and for other migrants, in which they are put at risk, and with the support of the government or by the government themselves.
Hi. I'm Saul Tannenbaum. I'm just a citizen, but I used to do identity management for universities. And it's really interesting to see that I didn't just work for a dysfunctional organization. Identity management, even on a global scale, is hard. We've heard the word empowerment a lot, but we haven't really talked about the power of these systems and the distribution of the power relationships here. One of the lessons of the social impact of technology is one of inclusion and participatory design, to let the people who are impacted by systems have a voice in how the systems are run and governed. Instead, what we hear are large, powerful, bureaucratic organizations of goodwill deciding how these systems should work, and noting that technology, is neutral and could be used for good or bad. One of the ways to fight against that is to make sure the impacted populations have a voice and not allow it to be, used for oppressing them rather than empowering them. Could any of you talk about any level of sort of participatory design or participatory governance in that regard?
If I may, we, when designing our biometric solution, we conducted a pilot in Malawi. It seems like ages ago now. To think it was just in 2013 or something, wasn't it? At any rate, we went and registered the population using the biometrics tools, and then we had these participatory groups whereby we, on one-to-one levels and all ages and nationalities, by group by nationality for communication purposes, we asked them how they felt about the tool, whether they felt it was intrusive, whether they understood why the data was being collected. Issues of consent were discussed. And I would have to say that the population were not very forthcoming with their feelings about the system. They were the typical response was, you know best, you're helping us out. The system seems to work. We don't mind. You've registered us before. We don't mind the additional. It was all very positive, but not very informative. So we went away from there with data that was, generally speaking, quite positive, but not very helpful in the design of the solution, I would have to say. We therefore made sure that the things that we thought were good for a system were thought about. And that is efficiency, speed, intrusiveness or not, all those different things that in the interaction with refugees we would want to make work. So, yeah, that's really my response to your question, I think.
If I could add, generally the people who are the subject of these systems have no understanding, no technical understanding. I had dinner with a guy a couple nights ago at the Harvard Faculty Club. He said, "How in God's name? I don't get it. How did?" And he's an IT guy. How did IBM have anything to do with the Holocaust? It just doesn't seem possible. On top of that, it's not do they understand what's happening with System A. I mean, certainly the Jews and everyone else, when their post office or their health benefits were automated, did not understand that they would be part of a layered process, cousin after cousin of technologic affliction, did not understand what would happen. So really, what the people have to say about a process that's already being presented to them is more or less feedback. What we need is watchdogs, and the watchdogs have too often ceased to bark, and that is why we need the people in this room and the people who do what we do to keep an eye on. If the door is unlocked, some people will just open it and do with what they wish.
Hi, I'm Andrew Bergman. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Applied Physics here at Harvard. And it's a question for Andrew. I was wondering, you mentioned issues with collecting and registering IDPs and the different sensitivities involved in storing that information. We saw a lot about the potential benefits of registering refugees. I'm wondering if there is a plan or if you have any thoughts on how to make the same benefits available to IDPs although this type of biometric registration may be difficult?
The risk with IDPs has a lot to do with, it's highly contextual, right? The risk is often their numbers are far greater than refugees when they move, so we don't get the operational capabilities together to be able to register them. But an even bigger risk is that you're in the country where the government still is. And if the reasons for their displacement have to do with government, then you're sitting in the country with their data, right? And if you're sitting in a country with the data of people that the government is persecuting, then you're taking a huge risk. So we've had a lot of trouble with the question of IDP registration because of what the protection risks are for those populations. With refugees, because they've left their country of origin and are in a different country, we enjoy the refugees enjoy sort of the legal instruments and the goodwill of the country, the host country, to make the risk of collecting and using their data for their benefit much less. So we've been struggling with the IDP question for that reason, and we really look to community-based protection rather than individual protection where we're gathering names and dates of birth. And so yes, we are starting to think about biometrics without personal data as a way, sort of like protection by design. In other words, trying to secure data about them that will help us help them, but won't be dangerous if it's falling into the wrong hands. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, panelists. Pam Dixon, World Privacy Forum. Andrew, my question is for you. I'm trying to work out where the legal authorities rest. So UNHCR, so when you store data globally, given the requirements of data localizations that are popping up in a variety of countries, such as Russia, other countries, etc., are you able to store the data, for example, all in Europe? How does the data storage and legal authority work out in terms of if a subpoena were to come from any country, where would that land? Under what authority?
That's a question I probably can't answer, and it's probably more to do with the fact that I'm more of a technician than a legal expert, and I've been doing my best here, but I don't really know, and I think it's problematic. It came up in the Europe context recently, and we looked to some of the UN instruments that have been written on this subject, and we found that when we get a sort of a loophole when it's in the context of assistance and in a refugee context whereby we are permitted to collect and hold that data for the benefit of a humanitarian disaster or whatever. So there's something there, and I wish I could remember what it is, but not a very good answer to your question, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. Thank you. Yeah.
Louise Struiker, Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, and former UNHCR colleague for 30 years. And I really have 2 points to support points made by all of our panelists, but especially Andrew. Just some notes from the field to support registration. I was acting representative 85 in Honduras in the middle of 3 wars, when we had a military incursion by the Hondurans into the refugee camp. They wanted to detain the guerrilleros. And I just managed to speak to our field officer from Tegucigalpa into the camp, say, Jorge, they are coming. And he managed, 3 people were killed in this detention and 10 were detained. And he managed to tell them, give me your cédulas de identidad, give me your identity card. And it turned out that all detained had been issued a refugee card by the authorities of Honduras. So it saved their lives. And we could sort of get them out of the country alive and safe. In other situations in Kazakhstan, we could document the Uyghurs who were persecuted, or in my last post in Bulgaria for 5 years, it was life-saving. But in my book, which I just published here at Harvard at the law school and under the umbrella of the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, and we presented here at the Kennedy School with the Carr Center, there is a chapter on innovations in refugee protection, and you have the biometric registration of refugees, such in Sudan, what Andrew so, I think, insightful and importantly presented. The conclusion of the book is ITC is helpful, but we have to be very careful. And I think all of us have gotten our dose of lessons from both our presenters, our three presenters here, and I just want to make the point that we have to keep in mind to manage it. And as UNHCR, of course, we have handled the data within the countries, but I think it becomes an ever greater challenge that we don't have another Srebrenica or similikes as a result. Thank you.
Last words from anyone? Short. I don't talk short.
No, I'm fine. Okay. Well, I'll thank the panelists for presentations. We obviously have very technical approaches, political approaches, and challenging, very challenging approaches. I feel like we could dig much more deeply into and move away from some of the technical questions into the ethics that are so clearly raised, especially by Edwin, about the dangers that can exist when new infrastructures are in place and how easily they can be abused. But I thank all of you for coming, and I'm not exactly sure what is happening next, other than I'm supposed to be done here, but there's a short break and coffee. Okay, thanks to the panel.